Hello, everybody. I see the door closing, so I think it's time for me to slowly start. Thanks for coming to my talk. I'm Olivier Destrebecq, and I'm going to talk to you about app quality and what you can do to keep your app quality up. I know this is the last talk of the day. I'm like the last barrier between you and the party and dinner and all that. So I'll try to keep it interesting and hopefully not too long. And if you keep it to not too many questions, you might get out early. So let's start with pushing the right button on the remote. Users are expensive. Getting a user to download your app, to install your app is expensive. So I got this data from Liftoff. And you can see that getting a user to install your app is about $4 these days. I think those are iOS statistics. I don't know if they cross over to Android. But is there a laser on this thing? No, maybe. Here you go. But you can see as you get a user through the funnel, it gets even more expensive. Like just getting a user to register for a subscription app is about 30 bucks. And then if you want them to actually pay something, it gets to 160. So you can see that depending on the market that you're in, cost varies, but it's definitely not cheap to get your user in your app. So crashes, and I'm specifically going to talk about crashes here because that's easy to measure, but quality issues in general are expensive. So imagine a 2 million monthly active user application. And before I was doing the talk, I was like, oh, I don't know which app fit in there. We just got a presentation in the TomTom room earlier where they have 60 million active users per month. So I'm like, okay, 2 million is good. So imagine an app like that where the application is stable at 99.7%, which means that only 0.3% of the users will see a crash each month. And you're like, hey, that's great. Great number. I'd be happy to have an app like that. I actually had one. But there's still 60,000 people every month that will see a crash. And then if you correlate that to another stat, which is only 16% of the user will try a failing app more than twice. So that means 84% of the user will just give up on what they were trying to do. They might come back to the app, but imagine that just 10% of those users say, screw it, I'm never using this app again. That's about $24,000 at $4 a pop. So that's not even taking into account all the costs that you have to get people to register or buy something from you. So quality is important, it's expensive. If you need to justify that to your boss, that why do we need to have better process and better quality, that number alone should get them to think about it. So how do you do this? How do you avoid this? Oh, and I just noticed that. Let me push a button, magic button on my phone. All the slides are going to be on Twitter, and I forgot to push the start button at the beginning, so they're going to be a little late. But that saves you from taking a picture if you want to tweet about them. So how do you get started right? Know what you want to implement in your app. The goal of the app is to serve your users, to make them happy, to delight them, not to put as many features as you can. So make sure that you know exactly what scenarios you want to follow, what you want to enable the user to do, and stick to those. Avoid the feature creep. It's the more code you have, the more quality issues you're going to have, the more stability issues you're going to have. So make sure to stick to your initial plan and only implement what is important. Take the time to iterate on design. That is really important. Design is easy to fix. Designer might tell you, oh, it's going to take some time, and it's true, it takes some time, but compared to fixing code once it's live in an app, it's a lot cheaper, it takes a lot less time. So make sure to iterate early on your designs. Set up your team correctly, know where the bug stops. One of the projects that I was working on, there would be bugs, and they would just pile up in the database, and nobody would care about them, and they would never get fixed. If everybody on the team has a specific role assigned to them, know which area they own, then at that point they become responsible for that area. So they'll be a lot more motivated to actually fix the issues that are in there. Work with people that you enjoy working with. You don't always control that. I know, we all have bosses, and some of us like to hate them. But if you work with people that you like, you'll like communicating with them, you'll enjoy collaborating with them, and they'll make working on the app a lot easier, and you'll end up creating better code. And then, as a team, peak your approach to quality. I'm going to give you a bunch of techniques and tools and processes that you can use. Don't take my presentation and go back to the office on Monday and say, we're going to do this, because they're going to hate you for it. So go in a conversation with them where you're like, hey, we all want to get quality up. What ideas do you have to bring this up? Here are the ideas I have. What would you guys would like to start with? Pick one, start with it. Once it's running, go for the next one. So first one. I know as developers, we tend to not do the user testing ourselves. It's either somebody else, or we're like, hey, we don't need to do it. But user testing is very enlightening, especially for developers. Seeing how the user is going to interact with the application, what confuses them, what doesn't confuse them, is very important. So if you ever have the chance to go on user testing, please go. It's very important and great, enlightening. 4 quick tips for you. Don't lead the witness, meaning don't ask leading question. If you ask, hey, was it easy to find the search button? They're going to be like, oh, it was supposed to be easy. Yes, it was easy to find it, even though they might even know where it is. Ask them more questions along the which line. For example, which information is more important to you? In that scenario, you might discover that they don't even care about the search function because there's a better way or they have a different mental model to find it. Second tip, ask the user to go through the main scenario. Don't ask your user, for example, if you have an e-commerce site, don't tell him, hey, go to the shirt section and buy a shirt. Because that's not what your scenarios are for your app. The scenario for the app is you want to buy a shirt for your job. Use this app to buy one. See what they do. You might find that they use the search extensively, or you might find that they browse extensively. And maybe you'll be able to cut search or cut another feature that you thought were great. The third tip that I have for you is observe and shut up. Silence is uncomfortable. Let me test you a little bit. People like to feel silence. Don't let it be you. Let it be your users, because they'll start talking about what they think of the app, what their mental process is, and you'll learn a lot about how your app should behave to match their mental model. And answer questions with questions. If a user asks you, hey, where's that search button? Don't tell them, hey, top right corner, click here. No, ask him where, if there was a search feature and you were designing it, where would you put it? Because they'll tell you where they're looking for it, and then you can change your app as needed. Let's go a little bit more technical now. Security, I'm going to say most of us hate it. It's not something that we want to spend time on. It's a fine line. Walk it regularly. You can think about security once, forget about it, and then you'll have security problem down the road. It's an ongoing process. So don't be one of the major names that were in the public, in the news lately. Make sure that, again, you have somebody that's responsible for it, so that he's the one that's going to walk in the hallway and say, you know, security is important, something needs to get done. On the mobile side, there's the OWASP Mobility App Security Checklist. Take it out, check it out as a team, walk through it, see where you think there might be issues, prioritize them, and figure out which mitigation you're going to put in place. You're not going to solve all the issues, you're not going to have a 100% secure application, but you can make it where you won't be in the headlines like those guys in the last few years. And do it regularly, every month, every 6 months, but don't just do it once. Version control is your best friend. I've joined a project once where they didn't use version control, and I was kind of amazed that they were still functioning, but that meant that releasing for them was a pain. Collaboration on multiple features was a pain. And so when I joined, we started using version control, and most importantly, we started using branching model. Branching model is great in that it allows you to work on multiple releases at the same time without stepping on each other's toes. On that team, when I joined and we started using version control, getting one version out would be a pain and would take forever because we fixed a bug that we wanted to fix for the release, and then somebody else would check in a feature, and then we'd try to release again, and then more bugs, and we'd never get out. If you use a branching model, you'll be able to fix those bugs in those branches separately and keep a clean release branch that you can get out whenever you want. Another process to use when you're doing your iOS app, bug lifecycle. It goes back a little bit to the responsibilities that I was talking about earlier. This one is from Bugzilla, but essentially it's define the different steps that a bug goes through. So first it's open, and then, well, let's see. First it's new, and then it's assigned to somebody, then it gets resolved, then it gets verified. But the important part is that you know that on each of those steps, who get those. So for example, usually it's going to be a tester that opens the bug, assign it to a developer. And then the developer is going to fix it. And the important part here is that once it's fixed, it doesn't stay on his plate. Because if it stays on his plate, it's never going to go anywhere. It should go on the tester's plate so that the tester can verify that the bug was fixed and say, yeah, we're all good, or, no, you're bad fix. Go back and do it again. This way that makes sure that whenever a bug gets fixed, it actually does get fixed and actually does get released to the user. One practice that is popular in some part of the world and not so popular in other part of the world, pair programming. 2 brains are always better than 1. Pair programming is great to catch default in the early phase of coding, because as you're creating the code, creating the functionality, you'll have somebody next to you that say, no, that's the wrong architecture. Instead of him telling you like 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later or whenever the code review or whenever it ships out to the user that, by the way, that was the wrong architecture. So it's great to use pair programming if you're working on complex tasks, complex algorithm, because you'll get the benefit of the second brain. If you work on simple tasks, you'll just be wasting each other's time, because one will be actually doing the coding and the other one will be like, nah, you're doing fine, just keep doing it. Another great benefit, though, of pair programming is mentoring. If you have people of various levels in your team, it's a great way to share knowledge from senior to junior or intermediate. But it's also a great way to learn new tricks to the older guys. Because the new people will come in, learn new things, and they'll just pass it on. I can't believe how many things I learned by looking at other people's code. And of people that were more junior than me and had less experience. Along the same line, if you don't do pair programming, you should at least do code reviews. So there again, it's the benefit of having 2 people looking at the same pair of code. And 2, 3, 4, it's always great. And there was actually a talk this morning that talked about code reviews by Thomas. I won't pronounce his last name because I won't be able to do it. But if you haven't had a chance, Unmaintainable Code, iOS Developer Perspective, check out the videos when they come out. It was a great talk and talked about code reviews and how to make good code reviews. So same thing, it's a great way to learn new practice from fellow developers. Allows you to find spots, allows you to find flows in the code fairly early before you release it, before it goes into master, essentially, which is a great time to catch it. Not as early as pair programming, for example, but still better than before it gets out. One piece of advice that I have, doing code reviews over a tool like GitHub or one of those is great, but it's very impersonal, and that's when you can get into, I don't want to say relationship issues, but that's kind of where it's going. So don't hesitate to do the code reviews on your own time, but then have a conversation with the person. Sit down with them when they're going to look at your code review so that you can have that conversation one-on-one right there about what you said, what you thought about it, and they can say, yeah, I agree with you, and how about we do this instead of this? And then there can be a real conversation, and you can really learn from each other's. Also, it's not the place for spell check and format things. I'm going to talk about other tools later where those should be taken care of. But if you talk about spell checking and indents and that kind of stuff in code reviews, you're wasting your time. Automate your testing. Manual testing is great. We all do it. I do it all the time. But it's slow and it's painful to repeat. So if at every release you need to go through your test matrix of every single test case, it takes forever. So use unit tests, integration tests, and UI tests so that you don't have to repeat yourself as often as you want to release, essentially. The one thing that I've learned of implementing UI tests is that they're a pain to maintain. So make sure you focus on the most important flows. One thing that I've learned, for example, on a big project that I worked on before, we did the registration screen, we tested it, it worked, and then we haven't touched it for 6 months, and then we started getting emails from clients, hey, I can't register. And we're like, what? Anyway, if you automate that testing, And I would argue that the register screen is probably like one of the most important screens in your app, but one of the screens that you'll most likely almost never touch. But we broke something in the back that made that registration was impossible. If that was automated, we would have found it a lot earlier, and that would have been a lot better. On the other hand, unit tests are very easy to maintain, so cover as much as you can. That's a place where you can really cover a lot of ground and get a lot of like safety net when you do changes in your app. So don't hesitate to be generous there. There's a lot of tools to do those tests. You can use XCTest, Cucumber, Appium, which allows you to actually do cross-platform tests, both Android and iOS. And then Earl Grey is a tool that I just discovered before this presentation, so I don't know much about it. But there's options. Just pick the one you like. I know personally I like XCTest because I write them in Swift, so it's the same language as the app. It's easy for me to do them all in one place. So once you've created all those automated testing, your goal should be to set up continuous integration. If you have an app and you want to make sure that you can release often, the only way to do this is to automate the release. And if releasing is hard, then the release cycle lengthens, then the feedback from the user lengthens, and then the quality of your app is going to go down because you can't iterate as fast. So to me, I define continuous integration as continuous build. So that means having a server somewhere that whenever you change code will actually build your app. Automated testing, so running those tests on every build or every pull request as often as you can. There was a talk on automated testing earlier where he was saying that they have a machine with 10 different devices and they run their tests as often as they can, but the test suite still takes like half an hour or something like this. So they can't run it on every commit, but they run it as often as they can still. Same thing, there's a lot of tools that you can use. Let's see, Bitrise and BuddyBuild are commercial solutions, cloud providers that allow you to do your build online. They're really easy to set up. My analogy is that Bitrise is kind of the Unix of continuous integration in the cloud, where BuddyBuild is the macOS of the integration in the cloud. There's a lot more things you can do in Bitrise, but BuddyBuild is a lot easier to set up. And then if you want to host it yourself, you can go the Jenkins route, which is great. I set up a Jenkins box before. To be honest, I thought it was a pain, so I highly advise using one of the other two. And then Fastlane, which is a great tool to automate your build locally on your machine, so that then when you go to those automated servers, you can just say, hey, use that configuration from Fastlane to build your application. So pick the one you like. They're all great. There was a talk in the TomTom room just an hour ago where he talked a little bit more about their specific setup with Fastlane and their server around build automation. So let's go into more tools from now on. Static code analysis. I'm losing my English. So static code analysis find issues with your code. You could argue that maybe it's a little bit like the compiler, but it does more advanced check and balances. And it's really useful. Same thing, there's multiple tools here. Xcode has the analyze feature, so run that regularly. Make sure that you didn't introduce any issues from there, because it will tell you issues that otherwise will potentially crash on your user's machine, or worse, cause error that are not even reported to you afterwards. The one that I like to use on top of Xcode is SwiftLint. And the reason why I like to use it is we all know that classes should not be too long, that methods should not be too long, that and there's so many rules that we can apply. And then we code, and then we're like, it's getting a little long, but who cares? Nobody will know. And you keep going, and then you come back 3 days later, and then you add some more, and you end up with like massive classes and all that kind of stuff. The beauty of SwiftLint is I set it up where on every build it runs, and so whenever I add code, it tells me, hey, this method is too long. And I'm like, okay, fair enough, it is too long. I'm the one who set the limit on how long it is, so I'm actually going to fix it. And it showed me how much there's refactoring that I can do to simplify my code and make it easier to maintain in a way. And I think that's great to have somebody that can look over your shoulder all the time and kind of give you a gentle reminder, hey, warning, this is too long, you should do something about it. Make sure to run it on pull request also, because some people might ignore the warnings. Enforce the zero warning rules. There's nothing worse than a project where you already have like 40 warnings, and then you start working on it, and pretty soon you have 90 and 100, and then you don't even notice them anymore. So if you enforce a zero warning build rule, then you're sure that you'll take care of them all the time, and you'll notice them as soon as they come up. And again, adopt the rules with your team. The rules that you can pick in SwiftLint, there's a lot of them. Some are debatable, others are more accepted. But if you don't discuss them with your team, some people might feel resentful about having to follow them. So make sure that's a topic of conversation. Use crash and error reporting. I think at this point, pretty much everybody uses crash reporting. I mean, it's been built in iTunes Connect at this point. So when a new application crashes, you get all the information back to you, and you know kind of where in your code the application went bad. But what's worse than a crash that you don't know about, and at this point, that problem is kind of solved. But what's worse than a crash that you don't know about is an error you don't know about. So if you look at the code on the right, I'm sure you've seen that at some point in your career where, hey, if I don't get the image, then just get out. Like, that's fine. That will never happen, which is probably true 99% of the time. But if that's your checkout button, and all of a sudden your checkout button is transparent because you don't have the image, it's probably not $24,000 that you're going to lose, but a lot more because people can't check out from your app anymore. So at least if you use a system like Rollbar, just put an error. It doesn't even have to be a string of text that makes sense, just something that you can uniquely identify. When that happens, you get an error on your server, and your server tells you, hey, this error happened. You can go look at your code and say, oh yeah, the checkout button doesn't show anymore. How about we revert back to an old version? So at least you know about what's happening. You can fix issues before they happen to a lot of people, and really shortcut that feedback cycle. You don't have to wait for a user to send you an email to say, hey, I can't order from you anymore, what the hell? Link both your crash reporter and issue reporter to your bug database. That will push a lot more visibility on it. If your crash reporter and your issue reporter on a separate service, separate server, there's only a couple of people that are going to check it, and then you're going to miss potential issue with your app, where if they're in your bug database, then the entire team can see them, and you know that they're happening. And then, prioritize issue based on frequency. You might get this error, for example, here, but it only happened once. Well, yeah, sometimes, random things happen. Test on real devices and in context. There's a lot of things that the simulator is not great at. There's things the simulator just can't do. I'm thinking about DLE and Wi-Fi devices and camera-based app, Touch ID. All kinds of things that are really dependent on the hardware. But then there's so many things when you just walk outside and you notice that, hey, in the sun, contrast in the app is not good, or with bad network connectivity, the app just doesn't perform. It's all things that you can really only notice in the real world. And also performance, really, the only place you can test it is on a device. So don't hesitate to get those devices, get out in the real world, and get some real experiences. Automate as much as possible. So there's a lot of things I talked about today that are great, but if they're only run once, if they're not used as gatekeepers, they will not really help you for quality. So, for example, your unit test, if they're only run once on your machine, then that's not that great. But if on every pull request, before you even do the code review, they're run, then you can say, hey, the tests haven't even passed, so how about you go look at that pull request again on your own and fix it before we move forward. And really try to put as many of those processes and of those tools in your continuous integration system. As I said, automate as much as possible. Yeah, the goal is prevent bad code into master, essentially. That's how you'll save yourself quality headaches. And I was actually a lot faster than I thought I was going to be, which is good for you. Any questions from the audience?
This will not be a great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
This will be not maybe technical question. The thing is that if you have a team which has very little or none rules that you talk about, which ones will you implement in the first place?
Is it a team where nobody knows any of those, or is there some people that know and other that don't?
I would say that partially everything is known. We are just setting new rules because of the fact of we are going for ISO and the next ISO and so on and so on. Yeah. That's why because I'm responsible for it, I would like to know where should I focus first.
I would start with code reviews because it's a great gatekeepers. If you have some people that are knowledgeable in the code quality aspect, like that can be reviewed, that's also a great way to pass knowledge and share knowledge, especially if you can do it where it's code reviews, people review the code on their own, but then the giving of the feedback is actually somewhat live in person, because then that's really allowed to share a lot of benefits there. And then I would say after that, start to build an automation and pick one of those tools at a time and go down the list. But code reviews is really great. And then SwiftLint, if you can get that in, at least, even if you put like limits, some of them has various limits for how long the method can be and all that, and you can reduce them over time. But that start to push people to think, oh wait, like 200 lines is getting long, like should I do something? And then they can start thinking about it, and progressively you can get down to 250 or whatever target you might have. But yeah, I would start with code review, SwiftLint, yeah, that should be, and then automation, I mean unit testing. But unit testing is a big culture shift if you haven't implemented that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
More questions? Again, shy audience. I got actually one question, I think, or maybe more, but actually I'll start with this one. What do you think about code review and the kind of like a methodology? You think that only senior developers should review the stuff, or maybe it should be like whatever, we should pick up like random person to review some stuff just to make other people know generally about the code, about what other people do, or it should be like a kind of a code owner who knows stuff, most of the stuff, and he is just the one who really accepts the changes?
I wouldn't have a single person having a kind of God status, because I believe in a more flat kind of organization, and if you want people to learn, then they have to feel like doing the code reviews, they actually have a word in the process, and if they know that that one person can override everybody, then like what's the point of doing the code review? So yeah, I would say there will be people that have more experience potentially and can find more to criticize in a pull request, but I wouldn't make them like the person to say yay or nay. You can make it a majority vote if you want, but at the same time, like when the people will do the code reviews, they'll be like, this is important, this, yeah, it would be great if you change it, but at the end of the day, it won't change too much. And so it's kind of a negotiation in the team of like, what are we willing to accept to merge? There's one project where I worked on for a while, and then we were going to transition to another team in a different country, and the other team started sending pull requests in, and we didn't have one person like set the rules. It was kind of a team, and we had 3 people do the code review independently, and all of them said, no way, like just take it back and go do it again, like we'll point you in the right direction, but this is not the way to do it. The fact that it's multiple people that say it makes it easier to accept on the other side, and then you don't start having those bad, hey, he's always the one telling me no, 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 no. At least it's not always the same person. And sometimes, it just looks great. But code review where you just say looks great, you should ask yourself the question of, is it really all it is? If you are on Twitter, I added some links to various articles that point to good techniques for those various slides.
Cool. Yeah, so I've got one more question actually. maybe it's a dummy question, but it really bothers me. What do you think, who should click basically on this green merge button? The author of the change or the guy who reviewed the code?
I like to keep it to the author of the code because that that put the responsibility on him to do the changes that were requested or to ignore them. I mean, sometimes it's okay to say, great feedback, thank you, but no. And it keeps the responsibility with that person, which I think is great. I haven't really experimented with the other way of like the other person that did the review say yay or nay. And
I think it happens in this kind of goat mode when the one guy is the branch owner. And
and then the problem is that sometimes like that God mode is the boss, and then it's like, who's reviewing him? So that's why I like everybody does the reviews, and whether it's the manager or any of the employees that submit the code, it's the same code review for everybody. It's the same standards. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Oh, one question.
Nice talk.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do you use sometimes disable rule for SwiftLint? And why, if you use it?
I think the one that I disable the most often is the line length rule, because with the name of the method in the Cocoa framework, sometimes they can get really long. If you happen to add a comment for that very specific line, then you easily get to whatever the length might be. So that's one of those. So yeah, it happens. My rule though is that if you disable it, with your disabled statement, there should be a comment that said why you disable it and why it's okay to disable it. So the line length, you can see why it was too long, blah, 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 but there's more code complexity rules, for example, like cyclomatic complexity. I would not advise disabling that one, but if you do have a valid reason to disable it, then document it, because otherwise the next person is going to come along and see, hey, why was it disabled? I don't know, and then start doing something that you didn't want to. My philosophy on code comments is don't tell what, but tell the why. So the disable rule is the what, you should add the why behind it, so the next guy after you, and the next guy after you might be you in 6 months, who's going to be like, what the hell was I thinking? So think of yourself. Be nice to yourself.
Anyone? No. Cool. Thank you very much.